2018. I hereby declare this meeting of the Howell Township Zoning Board to be open. Adequate notice having been given pursuant to the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act in the following manner. First, on January 9, 2018, a copy of said notice was mailed to the Asbury Park Press and the Tri-Town News. Second, on January 9, 2018, a copy of said notice was hand-delivered to the clerk of the Township of Howell. Third, on January 9, 2018, said notice was posted in the office of the Zoning Board and on the bulletin board in the Howell Township Municipal Building, 4567 Route 9, Howell Township, New Jersey. In accordance with the Fire Prevention Code and your safety, please be advised that this facility is designed with 2 emergency exits, which are on your right at the front and rear of the meeting room. Furthermore, smoking is not permitted in the municipal building. Please take note that this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcast on Howell Township TV 77.
Thank you, Eileen. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, you may. Mr. Amata.
Present.
Mr. Hughes has been excused. Mr. Mertens.
Here.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Here.
Mr. Posh.
Here.
Mr. San Clemente.
Here.
Mr. Orozco.
Here.
Mr. Moretti.
Here.
And Chairman Nansen.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Eileen. Can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Tropoli, you swear in the professionals, please.
The record should request that tonight we have Mr. Cunliffe, Mr. Mallon, Ms. Bean, and Mr. Howard all sworn.
Thank you, Mr. Tropoli. Approval of minutes.
We have no minutes this evening.
Vouchers.
We have no vouchers.
Correspondence.
Excuse me,
have
wait.
one voucher.
We do
Oh,
have
we
one
have a
voucher.
voucher.
Sorry.
Okay. Do we or don't we?
We do.
Oh, I know. We'll just pass that down. We'll vote on it at the end of the meeting. Correspondence.
Yes, we do have one letter. It's from Mr. John Paul Doyle, Esquire. Please be advised that I will be representing the interest of Stavola Leasing in connection with the above matter, and the matter is L&L Paving Company, case number BA 1806. Commencing with the hearing scheduled for December 17, 2018, he has previously discussed this with the board attorney and the applicant's attorney, and he asked that to the degree that correspondence is forwarded by me or this office to please copy him, and he provided his email. Thank you for your courtesies, John Paul Doyle.
Thank you. Any other correspondence?
That's all I have.
Resolution.
No resolution.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we do have the resolution constituting the yearly review and report for 2018, which I would recommend that we review this at the end of the meeting for adoption. Obviously, this is a very important document that we should spend at least a few minutes talking about so that the board understands the work that we've done as a committee, and that ultimately can be presented next year to the town council. So I'm going to ask that we carry that until the end of this meeting tonight. Thank you.
Now, do we need to go executive session on that?
No,
Or is that okay?
not at all. Not at all, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
We had spoke prior to the meeting, about Monday dates. Do you want to discuss that real quick right now,
We can. I'm not sure if,
so the rest of the board understands what's going on?
I don't know if everybody realizes this, but the zoning board's been extremely busy this year. We are now up to case number 37 for the year, and I have 2 more on my desk. So right now, for our next couple of meetings, we have 3 and 4 applications scheduled, which brings us to February 25th is the first night that there's only 1 application scheduled. There's 4 applications waiting to be scheduled, and right now there's still 7 in the queue waiting to be deemed complete and then scheduled. So I was speaking with Mr. Tropoli, and then I spoke to Chairman Nansen this evening, and rather than just keep trying to juggle this calendar, we've decided to add a few meetings since none of our dates have been published for next year yet. we are going to add every possible Monday date through February, March, and April, hoping to clear some of this backlog that we have on our calendar.
Just because we add these dates, board members, doesn't mean we're going to have
No, if
meetings
there's,
on those.
if we don't have to have a meeting, we won't have it. We'll have our regular second and fourth Monday meetings, and we'll use these as fillers if we need to carry something or just to try to get rid of some of the stuff that's already on the calendar.
Do y'all understand that? Y'all have issues with that?
No.
I know you don't, Mr. Amata.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay? And I will
Mr.
take-
Roscoe, Mr. O'Donnell? Okay.
And what I'll do is I'll incorporate that for reorg into our meeting dates and for the resolution that we usually memorialize at the reorg, and then they'll be published after that,
Okay,
okay? Thank you.
okay, any comments?
No.
Okay. Okay, moving forward, I'm going to do this a little different tonight.
Okay.
This is a continuation of the case number BA 1806, L&L Paving Company, Inc. It's a use variance preliminary and major site plan. This applicant of L&L Paving Company, Inc. is applicant, One Greenway LLC, Two Greenway LLC is owners. They're seeking a use variance. This is a continuation of this case. And then I'm going to read the eligible voters. Eligible voters at this point is Armada, Mr. Hughes, Mertens, O'Donnell, Posh, San Clemente, Orozco, Moretti, and Nansen. Expiration date, December 31st, 2018. Mr. Butler.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Mr. Dole.
It's good to be here.
Yes, sir. Welcome.
All right, I believe the last time we left off, the public had asked their questions of four of my witnesses, the applicant, Mr. Brooke Herson, Jim Kennedy, and Gary Dean, and that we completed their testimony for this application. Tonight, I believe we're continuing with the starting the cross-examination of the planner, Ms. Cafone. She's here tonight to my right hand, your left. She was
Previously
she was
sworn.
previously sworn in, and I'm assuming Mr. Doyle is going to cross-examine.
Miss, you may sit right there. There's a mic in the middle of the table if you wish.
Mr. Chairman, at my age, I'll appreciate that offer, but at least to say hello, let me stand.
Okay.
John Paul Doyle, Carluccio, Leone, Diamond Doyle, and Saxon Toms River. We're now representing Stavolo Leasing, an interested party and property owner in Howell. I've, as a pinch hitter, tried to catch up as best as I can with the rather voluminous record, and I may not have gotten everything, so if perhaps there's an objection or a concern, as I know there was some dialogue between prior counsel, the board, and your professionals, I'd only ask for a little patience if
Yes.
I missed it, my lessons. I might have a different approach than my predecessor, so if you'll bear with me. I know the board's interest in moving along, particularly after hearing what your secretary had to say about the agenda, and I'll try and take that same approach.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Ms. Cafone.
Good evening, Mr. Doyle.
You would agree that the application before this zoning board is because the applicants seek a variance for a non-permitted use as well as use variances for having 6 silos, each 90 feet high, notwithstanding no structure is allowed in Howell Township to be more than 45 feet? It was a long question, but
It was a long question. I agree with all of it except the part that says no structure in Howell. I don't know about any structures anywhere in Howell. In the SED zone, there's a prohibition to 45 feet.
so if I understand, you're saying that you don't know that the 45 feet limit extends to other zones other than this one
I don't know. Your question was that no structures in Howell.
is allowed?
I
Okay.
don't know.
Okay.
I can only speak to the SED zone.
Is it accurate to say that the applicant also seeks, in addition to these multiple use variances, preliminary and final site plan approval and the preservation of certain non-conforming existing conditions.
Yes.
You would agree that in order for an applicant to meet the statutory and case law requirements to grant use variances, the testimony of a planner such as yourself is essential?
Yes.
You would agree that in a case such as this, the planner uses testimony from earlier witnesses to provide a factual basis for the planner to give the board findings and conclusions, fact and law that would support the variance relief the applicant seeks?
It's not just in a case like this, it's in most use variances.
I'm sorry.
I said, it's not just in a case like this, it's most use variances.
Most any D variance would need that, right?
Any variance, really.
Okay. You would agree that for a use variance, the testimony presented by any individual witness or expert, even all of the witnesses together, would not be enough to allow the board to legally grant the variances without a planner's testimony?
That sounds like a legal opinion. I think on a use variance, the board should have planning testimony.
And the testimony you gave in this matter included your opinion based upon your knowledge of the statutes as well as the case law and the facts of the matter.
That combined with a number of other things, my visit to the subject property, yes. So there were a number of factors that went into my decision, or my opinion.
And you caught my next question. And your conclusions as testified to previously
Excuse
are
me?
grounded in the testimony of the earlier witnesses.
Mr. Doyle?
It's not picking up, right? I feel like it's not.
You have to hold it right
Or you
there.
have to hold it really close. Okay.
Bob Barker's still on?
Bob Parkerson.
There you go.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Holler.
And your conclusions as testified to previously are grounded in the testimony of the earlier witnesses from your team, as well as your own preparation for this hearing.
Yes,
And when I mentioned the law, and you're familiar with the relevant case law, and particularly the book we all use, the Cox book on New Jersey land use and administration.
I'm aware of the book, yes.
You use it, don't you, as a part of your profession?
Of course.
Did you rely in part on the testimony of Mr., and I know this caused a page in the transcript, so I want to get the gentleman's name correct, Ridelli?
That's not the correct pronunciation,
Okay.
but
Let's call him Lance.
It's impolite. Did you rely in part on the testimony of Mr. Ridelli to conclude that an asphalt manufacturing plant should be permitted on this site, even though it is a prohibited use?
on Mr. Radielli's testimony, not so much. I mean, somewhat, yes, but I can't say that his testimony was fundamentally critical to my opinion.
Were there any parts of it with which you thought were critical?
Perhaps the operational testimony as to what they will do during the nighttime hours to avoid negative impacts in the area was critical.
In reading his testimony, I know it began with a very significant, very human interest story. That was not relied upon by you, was it?
You'd have to be more specific with what part of the testimony you're speaking of.
The first several pages in which he dealt with his family history, his late father, his brother, building a nest egg, going forward with their business in Tinton Falls, and trying to make a better business here in Howell.
That has no basis, in my opinion.
Are you aware that he has never operated an asphalt manufacturing plant?
It's really irrelevant to my opinion. Can you hear or no?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay.
Am I aware of that? Yes.
You are aware that on several occasions during his examination and cross-examination, he acknowledged he could not answer certain operation questions and deferred to the witness from Aztec.
It's not uncommon, Mr. Doyle, as you know, we often represent clients on use variances or other development matters where the applicant has not operated such a facility for. Take a medical marijuana facility in Brick. We certainly have never, that client has never operated a medical marijuana facility, but there's nothing inappropriate about representing a client who has never done that before. It's actually quite common.
Did you rely upon the Aztec representative in coming to your conclusions?
Again, there was voluminous testimony, so if you could be more specific and show me a section of the Aztec representative's testimony, I think I would be better equipped to answer whether I did or did not rely on it.
Is there anything that comes to your mind readily that was of prime importance to come in the conclusions you did?
No, but I reviewed my testimony to prepare for cross-examination, not the testimony of other witnesses.
You are aware that she acknowledged in her testimony that she had never even been on Yellowbrook Road?
I'm
I'm going to
gonna
object to the
that.
relevancy myself of
Yeah.
that, Mr. Doyle. If we could just focus as best as you can on the cross-examination of this witness as opposed to others. Thank you.
That begs the next question. You mentioned on page 45 of your testimony that your preparation for this hearing was pretty extensive, mentioning that you read our team's reports. What reports were they?
Mr. Doyle, before you proceed,
At the beginning of the meeting, you had handed us some transcripts. Are you referring to those transcripts
Yes, I
now?
am.
We probably should mark it, just so
Yeah.
we have it on the record, and I wouldn't mind if we could have them passed out.
That's fine. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that in the past, on this matter, the board did not have the benefit of transcripts that were ordered and which were available to my client. When I got in, I thought that you should have them, and I made those available. I excerpted out of them the full transcript of Ms. Caffone's testimony, and to the degree that I mention a page number, it's on there, and you can refer to it as I ask the questions.
Okay. What exhibit?
Well, this would be 03.
03.
I mean, obviously,
Do you have an
transcripts are
extra
part of the record, but just for the purpose of marking, we'll mark it as 03. And Mr. Doyle, that is the complete testimony of Ms. Caffone?
Yes.
Thank you. And the date on that, sir, I believe was October 29th?
Yes, it was.
Thank you very much. 03.
Okay.
Let me re-ask. You mentioned on page 45 of your testimony that your preparation for the hearing was pretty extensive, mentioning on the page before that you reviewed our team's reports. What reports specifically were they?
Certainly, Gary Dean's report, his letter comparing the permitted uses in the zone to the subject property. There were a few other reports that I recalled, that I read and went through. I believe we had a noise expert. He did a report.
Were you present during their testimony?
For some of it,
Were you present for the cross-examination?
some of it.
In order for you to draw the conclusions the negative criteria test requires, you consider their methodology and the facts they found in those reports and the conclusions they made?
It would be inappropriate for me to consider their methodology. I'm not really in a position to tell a traffic engineer or an acoustics engineer the methodology they should be employing, but I certainly did review their findings and their testimony.
In your examination of those reports, did you find anything that you thought was inaccurate or non-factual?
No.
When the team you referred to in your testimony was drawn to, when was the team you referred to in your testimony drawn together to work on this particular application?
Well, the engineer's been on the project for quite some time, and I can't really speak to when Lance executed proposals with the other team members.
Did your office, through Jason Orchiello, testify for this applicant on the 2016 minor site plan application?
I'm going to object to the relevancy
I-
of that.
I agree. We've kind of tried to keep those separate. You're speaking as far as the planning board case, correct?
I am. I'm just asking the question, not for what happened at that meeting, but only to put on the record Ms. Cafone's continuing participation in this applicant's matters.
Then I would reword that question as far as if she continued
Okay.
in this application.
Your office has been involved with the present applicant's past and present application from 2016 till tonight, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as a part of that, you were a witness, without going into the hearing, you were a witness during the interpretation question raised before this board in 2017.
Once again, I'm going to object.
I
the
agree.
relevancy
She
of-
answered that her firm had been sent, so that should be sufficient.
As a part of your preparation, you mentioned in your testimony from pages 44 through 47 that you had an opportunity to see the site when your client drove you around the area on the Friday morning before you testified, which would make it October 26th. Other than that one time, did you ever view the subject property and the surrounding areas previously with this application in mind?
Yes.
On what other occasions did you see the property?
On several other occasions. I don't recall the dates offhand, but there were several occasions over the years.
Inasmuch as this application, I think, was filed in April of this year, were they before then?
Both before and after.
And I'm going to object to the, as I sit here, I don't know the date that the application was filed, but the answer, it doesn't matter, because the answer was she's been to the site before and after this application was filed.
On any of those opportunities to see the property, did you walk around the property, this property itself?
Yes.
And how many times did you do that?
I don't recall exactly how many times I've walked on the property.
Was the operation run by the owner operating at the time?
When you say the operation, yes, the Friday before the hearing, yes, Lance was certainly operating his office out of that facility, yes.
What other operations did you notice?
I'm going to object to the question. We've kept this testimony as to the proposed use on the property, nothing regarding the current use of the property.
Mr. Chairman.
I agree. Yes, sir.
Questions aren't in and of themselves, but are to establish certain larger facts. One of the facts in this case, one of the areas of testimony was that the proposed use is, in a sense, not her word, but is similar to or a continuation earlier similar uses. So I think it's appropriate to see what did she see as to the nature of the operation, to see how close what they do now is to what they proposed before you to do.
And I respectfully, I disagree. Mr. Lance put the testimony into the record as to what the proposed use of the property was, and that's what the testimony that's been provided by all of my witnesses. This board has kept the questions of my witnesses to that proposed use and not the current use of the property.
I also feel that that's a mischaracterization of my testimony. I did not testify on the impacts of this application based on the similarity to what exists on the property today. So I do feel as though that really is a mischaracterization of my testimony.
If everybody wants to join in, I asked a simple question. What did you observe? I don't see what's so objectionable about that, Mr. Chairman.
And once again, Mr. Chairman, we're getting into what's the current use of the property out there, which is not what this application has been. Is that-
I have to agree, that's not what this application's about.
Thank you.
Was the manufacturing of concrete going on when you visited the property?
Once again, I'm going to object to that question. We're asking about the current use of the property. The application has been, what is the proposed use of this property? And that's what all of the questions and all of the testimony provided has been about, not about the current use of the property. Ms. Cofone has testified about that current, not the current, but the proposed use of the property, and that impacts on the surrounding community and on the master plan.
She testified that the concrete operation had been in, quote, 50-odd years. I think it's appropriate to find out whether that question, whether that answer or that statement was factual with respect to, has it been in operation 50-odd years, and are any of those the last few years?
Thank you. That, rewording that question, she did testify to the extent of the concrete plant being. So, do you want to rephrase that question to deal with the operation of the concrete plant that was prior?
When you visited the site, was the concrete manufacturing operation going on?
And this is specifically regarding the concrete plant.
Correct.
The concrete plant on our client's site, not across the street? No, it wasn't.
Now, I'm not asking you any questions about my client's site. They're not the applicant. Yours is.
Well, you said was any concrete manufacturing going on?
On
I
this
just wanted
site.
to make sure. No, there was no concrete manufacturing going on the site.
Do you know for how long there had not been any concrete manufacturing going on?
I do not.
Do you know whether the use had been abandoned?
In my opinion, it would not have been abandoned.
And how do you draw the conclusion it was not abandoned when it was not in operation?
Because in order for an abandonment to occur, the land use law is very clear that there has to be an overt act or an intent to abandon. Mere non-use of a facility does not constitute abandonment. Moreover, in 2017, when the Planning Board of Howell took this, or heard the recommendation to take this out of the zone, there was an acknowledgement that there are three. We have, I think, three when we're talking about concrete manufacturing facilities. Then those minutes go on to reflect that, and the asphalt and concrete, they are clustered in one area of town. So when the board, the planning board, was contemplating the planning board hearing to do the referral to take the asphalt and concrete out, it was specifically recognized by that board that there were three concrete plants in town, and that was in 2017. So I think that it was always treated by the town as a concrete plant, not an abandoned concrete plant, an existing concrete plant.
Did you, in your visits to the site, determine the distance between the site and Route 33 by traveling on Yellowbrook Road?
No.
Do you know today, as you sit here, as the planner in this matter, how far is the applicant's site to Yellowbrook Road, by Yellowbrook Road to Route 33?
I think Mr. Dean testified to that offhand last time, but I don't recall the exact distance. It's not far.
Is the distance between them, which is 1 mile, relevant to your conclusions?
Is it relevant, the distance to Route 33?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Why?
Well, certainly, the way Lance operates his business, having regional highway access would be great to get the trucks, from his facility to and from the regional highway network, and proximity to Route 33 does that.
Do you know the distance from his site to Route 33 by taking Cranberry Road?
No.
Is that relevant to the opinions you rendered in this matter?
Not really.
Why was it relevant for Yellowbrook Road but not Cranberry Road?
Because I would think more of the truck traffic would go to 33.
Wasn't there testimony that there would be a difference in how they got to Route 33 at nighttime versus the daytime? And at nighttime, they would use Cranberry Road?
If Mr. Dean testified to that, I'm not really sure. That wasn't my testimony. If there was reference to it, it wasn't during my testimony.
And for the record, that was not the testimony that was provided. Testimony that was provided is that Yellowbrook Road would be the route that was used to gain access to either 524 or to Route 33.
As I said, my homework might have been incomplete.
So
I think.
it's okay.
Correct. In the distance between the site and Route 33 by way of Yellowbrook Road, what are the zones that one goes past?
We would have to go through additional SED zoning, and then I believe there's residential zoning.
Are there in fact single-family residences along Yellowbrook Road in that 1 mile distance?
Yes,
You know how many?
I don't.
Are there homes on Cranberry Road within, say, 1,000 feet of the site?
Yes,
What zone is on Cranberry Road just past the SED zone?
I'm not sure the name of that zone.
I'm sorry.
Her answer was does not know the name of the zone. I'm also assuming you don't know how far the zone is from.
No, it's SED zoning, and then there's the zoning changes.
As a part of your preparation, what master plans of Howell Township did you review?
The 2017 Master Plan Reexamination Report.
Any others?
There wasn't an earlier master plan. I don't have the date of that with me, but there was an earlier master plan.
You know, when was the last time the township completed a comprehensive overall master plan?
I don't recall the date.
But in any event, you didn't look at it. It was 1996.
I didn't say that. I said I looked at the 2017 reexamination report and an earlier comprehensive plan that I wasn't sure the date of.
Did you look at any of the reexamination reports before 2017?
Yes.
And which years?
Again, there are a few of them, so I don't recall offhand. But there were several in between that 96 comprehensive plan and the last 2017 reexamination report. There are a number of them.
Did any of the reexamination reports you reviewed, by specific use of the words industrial or manufacturing, support industrial or commercial uses in this property, in the SED?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that question?
Did any of the reexamination reports she read endorse by using words including manufacturing of asphalt or concrete in the SED zone?
I'm not sure that I understand your question. Did it reference this property specifically?
No, the SED.
I mean, there's one entire, I think, master plan devoted to discussion on the SED districts. So it's definitely been discussed in the master plans.
When was that discussion in the master plan that specifically discussed the SED?
It was one of the reexamination reports that predated the 2017 reexamination report, but I don't recall the specific date of it. But there's definitely master plan discussion in Howell, because there's a whole colloquy that talks about splitting up the SED districts. So there's certainly discussion in the Howell master plan about the SED districts.
Do you consider the proposed use to be a light industrial use, as that term has been used in the Howell Township Comprehensive Master Plan?
I consider it to be a concrete and asphalt manufacturing plant.
To the degree that certain of the examinations and reports differentiate between light industrial use and heavy industrial use. Can you render an opinion whether this is light or heavy?
I don't think that Howell defines those terms, light and heavy industrial, so I'm not really in a position to say what they're considering when they talk about light and heavy.
To the degree that I would represent to you that the last master plan, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong, comprehensive overall master plan adopted by Howell Township was the 1994 master plan. And it said in it, two important goals of the master plan are to maintain the township's commercial and industrial tax base, and two, reading in part, to provide an appropriate balance of land use which can provide employment opportunities. And they gave examples, including two, focus general commercial and light industrial development to the Route 33 corridor where there is limited infrastructure available for intensive development. Now, having heard that, do you believe that an asphalt manufacturing plant is light industrial?
I'm going to object because I have no idea what counsel is reading from. It's not in the record. He's not really identifying where this quotation is coming from, nor who made that statement. Without some further other qualifications, I'm not really sure. Okay. Okay, I was handed a photocopied version of portions of a 1994 master plan. It doesn't identify what municipality this is from. Well, Howell Township, I guess, is mentioned at the bottom. But once again, I don't know the veracity of this document.
It's from 1994.
Right, I mean, without some sort of qualifications, I don't know if Ms. Cofone, or actually, I don't even know if this board should consider a master plan from
Mr. Dole,
1994.
are you going to have direct testimony from a planner in your, you are?
We are.
Why don't you introduce that at that time with your planner? That way there's testimony and base on the record for it.
As a planner, would you look at the state development and redevelopment plan as it refers to your site? When I say your site, I mean the site that's under consideration.
The subject property? Sometimes.
Did you in this case?
No. That's also a fairly antiquated document, so.
It goes back to 2001?
Goes back, I thought, at least to 2001. So almost 20 years old.
But can we talk about 2001? What is dated 2001?
The state plan policy map.
Okay.
Ms. Cofone, you would agree that the case law has recognized three categories of special reasons, namely, one, an inherently beneficial use, two, undue hardship, three, the proposed use can serve the general welfare because the site is particularly suitable for the proposed use?
I'm sorry, am I aware that that's how the statute reads?
No, that the case law has recognized those three categories as reasons, special reasons, that would justify the granting of a use variance if all other conditions are met.
Well, I'm not sure that, though, the hardship is special reasons. I'm aware that those are the basis in which a use variance would be granted.
And it's fair to say, your opinion that a use variance could be appropriately granted in this case is not because this is an inherently beneficial use, correct?
No.
No, it
No,
is
meaning
not.
it's not an inherently beneficial use.
And the applicant isn't claiming undue hardship, is he?
No.
So it is that the site is particularly suitable for the proposed use.
Correct.
The When you considered your testimony and did your preparation, did you consider the SED zone in its totality?
When you say consider, what did I consider? Did I consider that the SED allows, as of right, 12 other different types of manufacturing uses? I mean, of course I considered it. One of the things that you have to demonstrate in the negative criteria is the impact on the zone plan. So of course I considered the SED zone.
When you testified, I became familiar with not only this site, but some of the other operations and sites in the area. Was the reference to area the SED zone?
Well, the site is surrounded predominantly by SED zoning, so yes.
Do you know how many parcels are in the SED zone?
No.
Do you know the acreage of the SED zone?
Of what SED zone? There are multiple.
This
SED
SED zone.
No.
Do you know how many of the uses in this SED zone are conforming and how many are not conforming?
There's a mix of conforming and non-conforming. I didn't do a tally. The use across the street is
Speak into the
non-conforming.
mic.
Right, the use across the street is non-conforming, so there are definitely a number of other non-conforming uses in the area, but there are also some conforming uses as well. Did I count them? No.
Are there vacant lots in this SED zone?
There may be, I'm not sure. It's a difficult question to answer because some of the sites in the SED zone are larger, so they may be comprised of multiple parcels, and they may be vacant, so I'm not sure because there could be multiple lots comprising one site. So I really don't know.
Are there any single-family homes in this SED zone?
Yes.
You mentioned there was a mix of conforming and non-conforming. Whatever that mix is, this application seeks to change a conforming use into a non-conforming use, correct?
No. There's a
That's not correct?
There's a concrete and asphalt plant on the property today, so that's a non-conforming use. So no, I would say that that's absolutely not correct.
Is it true that if the present use is in fact non-conforming, that non-conformity is sought to be enlarged by this application?
No, this is not an expansion of a use application. The applicant is proposing to demolish that existing structure and rebuild it, so I would not consider this an expansion.
Are there any silos on the site today?
No.
Are there proposed 6
Excuse-
90-foot-high
excuse
silos?
me.
Yes, there are. I'm sorry, yes, there are. Yes.
You want to re-answer that question?
Yes, there are silos on the site today.
Thank you.
We're proposing 6, but we're only proposing to build 3 of the 6 at this time.
The plan that the applicant has approval for shows 6, doesn't it?
I just said that. I said we're proposing 6. We're planning to build 3 at this time.
How many silos are on the site now?
I'm not sure. I think just 1.
Is that conforming height?
No, I think it's 142 feet, I want to say it is. I'm not
On
sure.
on the applicant site, there's presently a 142-foot
No,
silo?
I'm not sure how tall it is. I don't know. I thought it's over 100, but I can't be sure about that. Maybe it's not.
I think for the record, the testimony that was provided before, I think by Mr. Kennedy, was that the height on that existing silo was 65,
60, right.
60 or 65 feet.
But
I
I
thought it
think-
was 47, but I'll take your number.
No, it's more than 47.
Okay.
And also, I think there's more silos than that.
We can go back through Mr. Kennedy's testimony regarding the configuration of the site, but from my memory, without delving into the transcript, I think the silo was about 65 feet.
Yeah, but there's more than one. There's shorter ones, too.
I'm trying to picture the site in my mind at the moment. There may be 2, but I don't think that there's anything. I think that they're all around that potentially that same height.
Ms. Capone, if the present site is, as this colloquy seemed to indicate, that there's presently two 65-foot silos, you would not consider changing two 60-foot high silos and placing instead 6 90-foot silos, not an expansion?
This is not an expansion application. If it were, the proofs would be very different. It's not an expansion of a non-conforming use. That's a different D variance. That would be a D, I believe, a D3 variance for an, D2, a D2 for an expansion of a non-conforming use. It actually would be a lesser burden of proof than a D1. We put because we're demolishing those structures on the site, whether there's 2 silos, 3 silos, they're all coming down. They're non-conforming. There's a non-conforming concrete manufacturing plan. The exact mechanisms that I don't really know, but this is not an expansion of a non-conforming use application. The application is here seeking a new D1 use variance to operate his proposed concrete, asphalt, and manufacturing plant with 6 silos, building 3 of them now, and those silos going up to 90 feet. So the exact specifics of what's there today, I'm not 100% sure.
You said that the present operation is non-conforming. If that's true, why was the minor site plan application made in 2016 before the planning board and not the zoning board?
Once again, that this question is not regarding the present application before the board. This is regarding this application of a minor site plan before the planning board. It's not properly before this board for any type of discussion.
It's most certainly appropriate. She made an opinion that I think is relevant, that it is presently a non-conforming use and will continue to be a non-conforming use. We suggest that if the application was before the planning board in 2016, it must have been a conforming use.
Mr. Doyle.
Excuse me if I can finish. If the transition from a conforming use to a non-conforming use, I think, is one that should give the board more pause. It's an appropriate question.
And while I would respectfully agree, in normal circumstances, I know you're late to the game here, but several meetings ago, we had this conversation. The minor site plan application that this applicant made before the planning board was for an office use and storage of vehicles, which are permitted in the SED zone, having nothing to do with asphalt manufacturing. The asphalt manufacturing component of this application was a separate application, which your client brought an interpretation to this board. They said it was not conforming, and that's why they're here. That minor site plan application had nothing to do with asphalt manufacturing.
I would have...
Office use, vehicle storage, that is it, and that is permitted in the SED today. So that's why it went to the planning board. And if that application was made today, it would be back there, because that asphalt manufacturing has not yet been approved for this site. So there's no non-conforming use on that site. So that's why it went there. And that was subject of a conversation, not at the last meeting or the meeting before, at that meeting on October 29th, since I spent a quality time reviewing that transcript today. So that is why they were before the planning board. So it has nothing to do with this application. And that was that was decided by this board at that meeting.
That's why we've kind of kept that out of the testimony before this board in this application.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You stated on page 47 that the New Jersey American Water Company, a couple of properties south of the site, has a substantial tower on it. You know how high that tower is?
My client provided me that information before the last hearing, but I don't recall exactly the number that I testified to. What page you said 40, I don't see that on page 47 that I testified to, the height. No, about 140 feet.
And so you just related that number because your client told you?
No, I was out there and actually saw it with my very own eyes.
And how did you measure it?
I didn't measure it. I said, my client told me it was about 140 feet, and I
okay.
saw it.
You would acknowledge that if the variance was needed, that would be an inherently beneficial use? The water tower?
Yes, a utility would be an inherently beneficial use.
You also testified, quote, "The Anchor Concrete site has some pretty tall silos on it." How many is some?
I recall that there were at least 2.
How tall are they? If you don't know, are they of conforming height or are they higher?
They don't appear to be conforming.
On page 46, you indicated that the subject site was particularly suited for the proposed use in part because it contained a manufacturing plant for concrete products. Is that correct?
Yes.
But that plant has been out of operation for at least 2 years, hasn't it?
Again, I'm not sure the duration of how long that plant has been quiet.
Wouldn't the cessation of that operation change your opinion that it may, as to it being particularly suited?
Absolutely not.
You testified, again, page 46, lines 15 to 18, that the character of this area is well established with very commercial, intensive industrial uses. When you use the phrase "this area," define what you mean by this area, the SED zone or some other area?
No, this area I would refer to as the subject property and the area around it. So, for example, in the town's minutes, again, when it was referring to the area with the asphalt plants, the minutes specifically read, "The asphalt and concrete plants are clustered in one area." So that area would be the subject property, and across the street from it in this general area. So I think whether the plant was operational in the past 2 years or not is irrelevant. It's there on the property. There's one across the street. This is where the Township of Howell recognizes the concrete and asphalt plants to be clustered. So they are part of the character and fabric of this area, as has been recognized by the town's planning board.
Are you talking about 2 plants create a cluster?
Again, it's not my language, it's the township planning boards. The asphalt and concrete plants are clustered in one area.
You're reading that from somewhere?
I am.
What?
The minutes of the transcript of public hearing, May 18th, 2017, of the planning board of the Township of Howell.
And who's speaking to say those words?
Board member Nash.
Do you agree with what he said?
Yes, I do.
That 2 buildings make a cluster?
Well, when you're in this particular case, if you go back in that transcript on page 20, and this is Deputy Mayor Nicastro, is saying, "I think that we came up with the asphalt and concrete is typically you see these manufacturing plants in rural suburban communities like ours, and we have our fair share. We have, I think, 3. This is Deputy Mayor Nicastro. So when you talk about 2 of at least the existing 3 being right across the street from each other, 2 of 3, yes, I would consider that a cluster. If there were 100 asphalt plants in Howell, then I probably wouldn't consider 2 a cluster. But when we're talking about 3, and you have 2 that are, almost directly across from one another, I think hard not to consider it a cluster.
These 3 sites, do you know how many acres they comprise?
I know how many acres the subject property is.
Do you know how many acres are in the SED zone?
I already answered no.
The 3 plants you're speaking of are the one that is on your client's property? Correct? That's one of the 3?
Yes,
One of them is on Stavola property,
yes.
and the third is which property?
I don't recall the name of that one.
To the degree that there are 24 separate parcels of property in the SED zone, do you believe, is it your opinion, that what happens in those 3
Mr.
lots
Doyle,
should...
could you talk to the mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, should determine what is on this, in this zone?
Well, I didn't count the number of properties in the SED zone, so I don't know that there's 24 properties in the SED zone. And I honestly, I don't really understand your question.
The use of 3 lots which are non-conforming, should they dictate that additional non-conforming uses can exist within the SED zone because they're there?
I'm going to object to that question. I don't think there was any testimony provided that the uses, or whatever uses he's describing, are non-conforming uses within the zone. I think the testimony was that there are a number of manufacturing sites surrounding the property. And I don't think there was any testimony regarding whether those manufacturing sites are non-conforming or conforming.
Is not the present site...
Use your mic, Mr. Dole.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, I've done it now 3 times. I just find it difficult to look away from the person I'm
It's
speaking
okay.
to. The conforming, excuse me, this site is presently non-conforming, is it not?
No, it depends. I would consider the site to be a legal pre-existing non-conforming use because the concrete plant that's on it predated the zoning ordinance, or the zoning ordinance that took it out of the zone. So I think the land use law is very clear that there is a very different treatment for legal pre-existing non-conforming uses and non-conforming uses.
Just separating uses as to whether they conform to the current zoning. Is this a conforming use?
It's not a permitted use in the zone.
In fact, it's a prohibited use, is it not?
And I'm going to object. What is a
You
prohibited
know,
use?
I mean,
What is a prohibited use?
I don't know, read the ordinance, it says what it is.
Yep.
He's asking, I just want to make sure he's using the correct words. I don't want Ms. Caffone's answer to be taken out of context.
Ordinance 0-17-21 says that concrete and asphalt manufacturing uses are prohibited. End quote.
What date is that ordinance?
It was adopted, I believe, on June the 17th of 2017.
Correct.
That said, is that use of this for the site that application is made for, a non-conforming use under the current ordinance?
Under the current ordinance, the proposed use is non-conforming.
Okay.
That's why we're here in front of this board, and that's why you have jurisdiction. It's a use variance, yes, it's
And
non-conforming.
the other two uses you mentioned that formed, in your mind and that of a planning board member, a cluster, those two are also non-conforming, are they not?
They would be legal pre-existing non-conforming uses.
Okay. And now I'll get back to my question that we provided a foundation. Should the fact that there are 3 non-conforming uses in this SED zone, which I would represent has 24 lots, dictate or give reason for the use of the other 21 lots for further non-conforming uses?
Absolutely not. Each case has to rise and fall on its own merits. What decision the board makes on one application should not be the basis for what the board does elsewhere.
You mentioned in your testimony other uses, specifically George Harms, a gun shooting range, and sanitation uses. Is the George Harms use a conforming use?
Yes.
Is the gun shooting range a conforming use?
Well, I don't know. The ordinance reads multipurpose recreation and sports complexes in accordance with section 188-86. So to the extent somebody would want to consider a gun shooting range or recreation complex, people do shoot them for recreation, so I don't really know. I could make an argument that you could consider it a permitted use, but, I really don't know.
You mentioned sanitation uses, and I'm on page 46, line 23. What did you mean by sanitation uses?
Some of the uses that were out there had garbage trucks on them, so they appear to be some type of sanitation uses. I don't recall the name of the garbage truck facilities that were on there, but there were definitely properties that had what looked to me like sanitation trucks on them.
Are they a permitted use?
The permitted use list is so varied, distribution type of uses, assembly and packing, so I'm not exactly sure if they would be a permitted use.
You mentioned those 3 uses particularly, all 2 of which are, according to you, permitted, and the third one might be, as a basis for finding the area well-established with very commercial, intensive industrial uses. If those 3 uses are all permitted, and those are the 3 you cite, why should permitted uses give a basis for allowing a prohibited use?
Well, if you just want to pluck out the ones that I testified to that are permitted, I believe I also testified as to the concrete plant on your client's site. So, and there is Anchor Concrete next door to us that manufactures, which I spoke about. So, again, my testimony stands on the character of the area being established with both permitted and non-permitted uses. And when the board is evaluating the negative criteria, one of the prongs that you need to consider is the impact on the public good, which is the area which is around it. So you have to consider those uses when you look at the negative criteria.
You've concluded of this site saying it's really the heart of your SED zone. This township, with the recommendation of its planning board, passed an ordinance prohibiting the use you want. Why should a prohibited use be put in the heart of, as you called it, the heart of the district?
Because in my opinion, when the township did that prohibition, they specifically identified this area as an existing concrete and asphalt plant. There was also further discussion about not wanting to render those uses non-conforming when they did something like put up a fence. So in my opinion, as a professional planner, it was not the intent to eliminate all of these uses. So on page 20 of that same transcript, so it's not like we do not have these. The question is, how many more do we want? So to me, that prohibition talked about additional concrete plants beyond the ones that they already addressed in town. So I think that that was a very telling statement. How many more do we want? You're not getting any more with this application than you already had when you did that prohibition. Those same master plan minutes,
When you say...
so I'm not finished answering the
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry.
It's okay. So those same meeting minutes go on to read, a section about not wanting to render the existing uses non-conforming, such that if they did something to a fence or changed a driveway, that was not really what the town was looking to do, so it directed Jen to do further examination. So there was a concern at the time of not wanting to render these uses non-conforming in the event that they did something. So in my opinion, having read those meeting minutes and had read them very carefully and understanding that the town recognized 3 were existing and the dialogue was about adding more, I just don't know how you conclude that the town didn't want the plant on this site.
Is the protection of a pre-existing use in the condition it was at the time the ordinance adopted the same as giving it license to add 6 non-conforming, non-existent silos twice as high as the ordinance allows?
Well, this isn't an expansion. I already established this is a new application. I don't know how many times I can answer the same question the same way.
That
My
was a
answer is
different
never going to
question.
change. It's never, how many times you ask me, this is never going to be an expansion. It's always going to be a new D1 variance case, regardless of how many times you ask me that same question.
If it is a new application for a new use, then that is inconsistent with what you just said about the purpose being to preserve the right of pre-existing uses to exist so that if they want a fence, they can put it up. Isn't it?
If you interpret it as inconsistent, that's how you interpret my testimony. I don't think my testimony was inconsistent.
Was it your testimony that this site is particularly suited for the proposed use because it has a direct route to Route 33?
Yes.
How direct is it when it's a mile away?
It's not circuitous, and it's certainly not through any residential subdivisions. So yes, there are some residential homes along the way, but in the path to get to Route 33 is certainly concentrated with other uses that are as intense or perhaps even more intense. So the truck traffic that's going, as evidenced by Mr. Dean's testimony, and the percentage of truck traffic that this use would be contributing is already out there. And moreover, the SED zone allows 12 different types of manufacturing uses. So even if the board denies this application, truck traffic coming from this site to Route 33 is a very real characteristic of this area and this particular piece of property. So yes, this site, and that's probably why it's zoned SED, has got a pretty good route to get trucks from the subject property to Route 33. So take the existing use out of it, there's still a whole plethora of things that you can manufacture and develop. So I think you would be very challenged as a planner to come to the conclusion that manufacturing and running trucks off this site to Route 33 is not ideal.
You think it's ideal for the people who live in residential zones and have residential homes conforming?
If you mean Equestra, that job, developer, their builder of their homes sued the town to go there. The town didn't zone Equestria for what it is. Those people are in those homes because their builder sued the town and were able to go there as a result of a lawsuit.
I realize you wanted to make that point, but let me have you answer the question I
I did
asked.
answer the question.
Is,
Microphone.
Use the mic.
I think the board got it. I meant clearly the direct route we had been speaking to. That is to say, Yellowbrook Road, not the volunteered Equestria.
What is your question? I don't understand the question.
I'll move on for the moment. You said that, in effect, L&L would not be a precedent setter because there's already silos out there.
I would,
All you've been able to identify as being above the 45 feet is a water tower and your own client's site. Why then should this site be, for the first time, have a half a dozen silos twice as high as is allowed?
well, those weren't the only that I identified, but I also identified the ones on Anchor Concrete site. The silos are set very far back from the road. They're set back hundreds of feet from the road. The silos are set back hundreds of feet from the road. The character of this area is established with towers and structures that exist not only on the property, but on properties that surround them. And the distance that we're putting these silos from the road, in my opinion, are not going to have a substantial negative impact on the character of this area. They are literally hundreds of feet off the road, off the traveled roadway.
This town has a height requirement, while you might be unaware of it as you testified previously. In this zone, it's 45 feet. Most towns have height restrictions, don't they?
I would say almost all towns have height restrictions.
What is the planning reason why Howell in its 45 feet limit or other towns set height limits?
What is the planning reason why Howell set it to 45?
What is the planning reason for having height limitations?
Height is usually to limit the floor area ratio. So if you can control the height, then you can control the massing of a building, you can control traffic, you can control the intensity of a structure with the height.
Is part of it to do with the aesthetics, particularly in a rural to suburban area, not to have an urban look?
Well, I would say in most rural settings, you have farms, and many farms have silos on them. So I would not find silos to be inconsistent with farming, as silos, I think, are quite common in farming activity. So I would find it difficult to conclude that in rural communities, silos are out of place.
But in any event, in this municipality, in this zone where you are, it's a 45-foot height limit.
We are seeking the variances, that's right.
Aren't there ways to determine what the perspective would be for surrounding neighbors to see if there is a sight line that would interfere with their view of the sky, if you will?
For the height of a structure?
Yes.
Of course.
Did this applicant determine whether there would be a negative effect by using a sightline study, a balloon test, or any other known test?
We did not do a sightline study or a balloon test. Given the size of this property, given the character of the area, given the conditions that prevail on the property and those that surround it, I don't see, and the structures are set back, like I said, hundreds of feet from the street, which will make them far less visible. I don't see that there was a need to do that type of.
When you say it'll make them far less visible, you don't know that, though, do you?
Well, generally, the distance that it's set back from the street has an impact on its visibility to the roadway. So
How
if-
far, I'm sorry.
Can I finish answering the questions? So, for example, if they were sitting 5 feet off the road, they would be much more impactful than if they're set back hundreds of feet. So while municipalities have height requirements, they also have setback requirements because those things generally go hand in hand.
How far back are they set?
They're set back well over hundreds of feet off Yellowbrook Road.
I'm sorry, did you say 100 or hundreds?
Hundreds with an S.
In those hundreds of feet, is there any buffering taller than the trees on top of the berms that would obliterate their view to the homes on, for instance, Cranberry Road?
Generally, the purposing of buffering and trees is not to obliterate a view. In my opinion, as a planner, the purposing of buffering and berming and trees is to create a filtered view. When you have a building or a structure on a piece of property, it's really an inane conclusion to think that if you buffer it, you're not going to see it entirely. That's not the goal of buffering from a planning point of view. The goal of buffering and setbacks is to soften and filter the view. There's almost no instance where you can really buffer the site such that it's not visible. The intent of buffering is, like I said, to filter and screen, and I think we are providing quite an extensive berm on the property. We are preserving considerable amounts and returning considerable amounts of the property to green space. So I just don't see where, and we're only building 3 of the silos to start with, so I just don't see where they're going to have, number one, a substantial impact or alteration to the character of this area. And we have both buffering and screening to filter and soften and obscure the impact of those silos, which is exactly what the intent of buffering is to do. It's not to obliterate anything.
You just said for the second or third time, we're only building 3. Are you suggesting to the board that the application is being altered so that you won't ever build more than 3?
No.
Oh.
We're asking for approvals for 6.
So it is fair for the board to consider what would be the look in the neighborhood of 6 90-foot silos, correct?
Of course.
To what extent does the buffer you just spoke of filter the silos and the view of them?
To an extent sufficient that there's going to be no substantial detriment. Is it going to completely block the view of the silos? It's not. But somebody driving along in a vehicle from the roadway would have their view obscured by the extensive berming, buffering, and fencing that the applicant is introducing into the property. So it's going to have the impact of obscuring and filtering the view.
You volunteered before the considerations of Equestra. Could the Equestra residents see those silos?
I don't know.
Would not it be fair to find out so as to draw a bead on whether the negative criteria are in fact met?
The SED zone was there and functioning and operational and built when every one of those homes in Equestra was occupied. So I don't think that is relevant to make sure that they now can't see any of the operations that occur on an SED zone property. They can probably see the existing concrete tower or the concrete plan. And that didn't preclude them from buying there. They can probably see the silos on the stack on your client's property, and they can probably see the water tower and the towers or the stacks on Anchor Concrete's property. So they can probably have at least a filtered view of all of those things existing in this SED zone.
For all of those probably you don't know though.
Based on my understanding, and I'm familiar with where Equestra is, I worked on the Quick Check gas station, that's not too far from that, on 33, so I'm certainly not unfamiliar with the area. I would say that they probably could maybe see, something in this area.
Drawing your attention to page 48, lines 19 through 22. Having the silos allows us to store our material. How long could material be stored in those silos and still be of use?
I don't know.
I think that's more of an operational and was testified to.
You go on, so we can run and fill trucks during the night. Mr. Rodelli said that they would be operating 7 to 5, but he did mention occasionally at night. When you say during the night, how regularly, if you know, or is that an operational question, would they be open?
That's an operational question.
You go on, and we have a circulation route for that. What's that circulation route you testified to?
What page of my testimony are you on?
48 lines, 20 and 21. And we have a circulation route for that, meaning filling trucks during the evening.
So again, I wasn't the witness that testified to that, but I can tell you my understanding of that is that we will use the westernmost driveway during that time, which would then take, which would be minimizing the impact of the noise. And we would use that driveway during the nighttime operations, which, and I'm not sure Lance can answer if that's 11 to 7, but what we would consider the overnight operations.
What is the importance of having the silos for storage? That's the operational part?
Again, my
Okay.
understanding is that so they can manufacture, store the material, load trucks at night, and not have to manufacture it at night, as the manufacturing would be the, I guess, noisier of the two operations. So if you manufacture during the day, and then you have a place to store the material, then the trucks can come during the night and be filled without having to do the manufacturing overnight. That is my understanding of the purposes of the silos.
And then those,
And just for the record, there were other reasons placed for the multiple silos being on the property.
There are different types of materials, different mixes, yes,
excuse
there
me,
are a number of
question was
reasons
asked
why.
and answered. Mr. Butler then testified. That drew a response from Ms. Cafone. I think this is a question and answer period between me and Ms. Cafone.
Let's,
Okay, and what I was doing, I was correcting the record. As Mr. Doyle has said, he was not up to date on everything that happened, so I wanted to make sure that his question is correct in the record and has been answered correctly.
I'm sure Mr. Doyle will ask another question if it's necessary, Mr. Butler, so if we could just
Okay.
move
Thank you.
on, thank you.
Are you suggesting that the trucks would run at night because they would be able to take the material that was placed in the silos, having been manufactured earlier in the day? The trucks would, as the lady from Aztec, whose name I can't place.
Sutton,
Thank you. Sutton Choate.
perfect.
Getting better. Ms. Sutton Choate said that they could just pull up and take the manufactured material manufactured during the day and be able to make a run at night. Is that what you're referring to here? The benefit of the silos to allow that nighttime trucking of earlier manufactured material.
Well, that, and it allows the applicant to keep different types of concrete and not have to manufacture it all at one time, so he can then store his product, so that he has product on hand. So it's not just, the purpose of the silos is not entirely just to cease manufacturing at night operations. It's the efficiency of his business.
And what, to your knowledge, having just testified, is for the efficiency of his business, what about the silos makes it more efficient?
I think we're getting
We're getting
off.
into- we're getting
out
into-
of-
But
Right,
she
we're getting into-
testified to it.
We're getting into operational, I mean,
She,
that's
she's
in the
trying to
record.
answer your
Right.
questions to the best of her ability, but a lot of these are operational questions.
Okay.
And I wouldn't expect my planner over there to know a lot of the answers here. I think, Ms. Capone, back in your testimony, whenever you said, talking about the silos, were you basing on planning testimony, putting your planning testimony together, giving the whole scope of the operation. Am I correct?
Yes, of course,
Stan?
Chairman.
Did you ever ask the representative, Ms. Sutton Choate, whether Aztec made shorter silos?
I did not ask her that.
Mr. Rodelli testified that he believed they made silos of 45 to 50 foot high. Did he ever suggest to you that should he reduce the size of the silos?
No.
If I asked this before, I'm sorry. Do you know how long the stored material generally lasts in a silo?
You did ask it
operation.
before,
Okay,
and I said
thank
no.
you. By the way, have you ever done an application where your client was seeking either a site plan approval or a site plan approval with the use variance to produce asphalt like this client is?
Yes.
And who was that client?
Say it again. I believe it was FLM in Tinton Falls.
FLM?
I think that, I don't remember. It was
Okay.
over a decade. It was over a decade ago,
Okay.
and I don't know if that's the right, if they're in that right order. Those were the initials, FLM.
Was it for a use variance?
Again, it was over a decade ago.
Okay.
I think so. I don't remember.
In order to render the opinions that you did you read anything concerning the manufacture of asphalt, and in particular the plan for which this application is made?
The plan for this? I don't understand what you mean, the plan for this.
Well, they produce plans, some small
spec
black and
sheets.
whites.
Oh, did I look at the spec sheets? No.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry if that interrupted your question there, but I knew what you were trying to ask her. Aztec gave
Yeah.
a spec sheet and wanted to know.
Exactly.
Just to clarify.
Mr. Chairman, while I'm being clarified, I did see some, I think, 8 by 11 black and white spec sheets and I'll come to see the exhibits. Was there any typical large colored renderings or architectural?
I think there was, Mr. Butler, Aztec, there was a
There was right, Ms. Sutton
pamphlet.
Choate had entered into evidence
I think there's an exhibit.
A pamphlet book. It was an
Yes,
exhibit
right there.
of actual pictures of
Yes,
other sites that Aztec produces that are similar in nature to this proposed use.
okay.
How much acre, or what is the acreage count of the existing woodlands that will be removed from this site to allow it to be constructed if the application is granted?
Of the acres that we're removing, I don't know, but I know we're removing 13.1 acres of impervious surface.
I've
So
read that, but that wasn't my question. You don't know how many
how many we're
acres are being
removing? I
removed.
don't know.
Okay, thank you.
That was testified to.
Thank you. You said there was 3 purposes of zoning that are advanced by the granting of this application. Criteria G, speaking of uses that would, in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens, has there been any testimony that there's a need for this use on this site
No, you did not read the first half of criteria G, which talks about
I know
sufficient space in
Excuse me,
appropriate
excuse
locations.
me.
If she can answer that.
You have to be able to
No.
answer.
Yeah, yes.
No, I
She
didn't.
corrected what I said to add something I didn't say.
Okay,
I didn't say
re-ask
purposely.
re-ask your question, please.
You mentioned that this would advance the purposes of the zoning as found in 4055D1, and in particular criteria G, because, and I'll read the whole thing, which talks about providing sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, and industrial uses, and open space, both public and private, according to their respective environmental requirements in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens. Having said that, has there been any testimony regarding the need for this site having the prohibited use it seeks, and that need would be filled on this site so as to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens?
No, there's specific case law that we don't have, when we're doing a D1 variance, we do not have, there's no burden of proof or prong that we have to demonstrate that there's a need. So when I was speaking to criteria G, I talked about sufficient space in appropriate locations, how this being in the SED zone is certainly an appropriate location. So I think that I did not do any direct testimony on meeting the needs of anybody specific to this application or a need for this site at this location. That language is simply the tail end of the statute, and my testimony focused on this being a sufficient space, given that it's a large site, and an appropriate location, given the character of the area.
What's the case site on not having a proven need in your judgment?
I don't know. I don't recall the name of it.
You said criteria M is also advanced, which talks about encouraging coordination of the various public and private procedures and activities shaping a more efficient use of the land. What public procedure is engaged in this?
Most certainly, the public procedure of going through the variance approval process is a public procedure. We're here in a publicly noticed meeting, and I think it's an efficient use of the land to concentrate manufacturing asphalt types of uses in one area, particularly in an area that enjoys excellent regional highway access. So I certainly stand by my testimony that this is an absolutely great example of an criteria M, an efficient use of the land.
By excellent regional highway access, you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, the 1 mile ride on a 2-lane, unsidewalked, uncurbed roadway through 2 residential zones to get to a intersection on Route 33 that has no traffic light and has an F rating, correct?
The 1 mile road that's passed a number of other very intensive commercial uses that also have similar truck patterns that our traffic engineer testified. We would have a very small percentage of traffic, and further, that our use would actually have far less traffic than other permissible uses in the zone. So that route, yes, I stand by my testimony.
You say you go past a number of other uses. If you go out the northern driveway, what other commercial uses do you go past on your way to 33, other than the Schroth property adjacent to you, which is set far back, and the Harms property across the street?
Well, you definitely go by Harms, which is a pretty intensive commercial construction application. So, and I'm not sure, I thought that there was another commercial use next to Harms as well.
So the great number you're talking about is 2, maybe 3.
I think the character of the area, the SED, the board is very familiar with this character of the SED zone. There are certainly not just 2 commercial uses on this roadway. That's certainly a preposterous statement, actually.
And
Mr.
that's not what I said, was it?
You said 2, yeah, it was what you said.
You said, if you will, that on your way from this site to Route 33, in that 1 mile, down Yellowbrook Road, you go past a number of commercial sites. I asked you to identify them. I gave you 2, and you couldn't name the third.
I
So
said
I'm
there's
saying-
another commercial use next to Harms, I don't recall the name of it.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Dole, let's take a 10-minute break at this point. My counsel's telling me.
Thank you.
Board will be back at 9:25. Okay, Eileen. Mr. Dole.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you.
The particular suitability of this use for this site, I noted 3 reasons in the transcript you gave. 1, the historic use of this property of some 50-odd years for concrete manufacturing. 2, the well-established, very commercial, intensive industrial uses found in the area for which you gave several examples. And 3, having a direct route to Route 33. Did I state those reasons correctly?
What page are you reading from in the transcript?
It was generally throughout the transcript, but most likely on page 46.
I think that that's probably fair.
Did I miss any that you would have given or believe exist for concluding the particular suitability of this site?
Well, certainly, the size of the property lends itself to the proposed facility. We certainly have adequate facility to have the trucks stack, have them circulate through. So I think the board could also consider the size of the subject property.
Where's the Holmes property? Here it is, okay. He has 42 acres. And where's the other one? This one? Is that Anchor? Okay. Yeah. With respect to historically being used for manufacturing purposes, might not the same be said for the Anchor site, the Kerr site, and the Harm site?
Excuse me, the Kerr site,
Kerr Concrete Pipe Company?
I believe this is the curve.
this is a Kerr pipe plant.
Oh,
You've got Northeastern, which is a concrete facility across the street. You got the Kerr Concrete Plant, which is
this
the
one?
applicant's site. Anchor Block is up by the water, before you go up the hill. Stavolis Plant is a kind of catty corner from there.
okay.
And then
Is-
you've got other businesses up on top of the hill.
As Rosanna Dana would have said, never mind. Let me ask you and limit it to Harms and Anchor then. Those 2 sites have historically had a commercial use in this commercial area, have they not?
A commercial use, yes, they're both still used commercially.
They are both similarly the 1 mile from 33, aren't they?
Similar to the subject property, sure.
And obviously, they're also in this area you described as very commercial, intensive, industrial uses. If that said, wouldn't each of those, if they wanted an asphalt plant on their site, and Harms and Anchor both produce concrete, albeit not bituminous, that is asphalt, don't they have the same claim for a use variance you say your client does?
They don't, and again, each case has to rise and fall on its own merits. The board cannot use what was granted across the street or what exists. Every single case has to rise and fall. Each property is unique. The board, I don't know what the size of those property is. I don't know if they can accommodate. You heard Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Dean. I'm not sure which one answered the question last month as to the vehicle stacking, that we could have enough stacking on site so that we wouldn't have stacking out onto the road. So, we didn't study what the size of those properties was, so I don't really think it's fair to ask me or the board if a case could be made there. I didn't study if a case could be made there. I studied if a case could be made on the subject property.
And the Price versus, you're familiar with Price versus Himeji?
Yes, it's I believe a Union City case.
In talking about particular suitability, they say, quote, detailed factual findings that distinguish the property from surrounding sites and demonstrate a need for the proposed use may be helped to establish that this property is particularly suitable for the proposed use, and a lack of such findings may be fatal when tested on review. So my question isn't so much if they were to apply, aren't they as suitable and therefore cannot be distinguished from your property in as much as they both have a historic use, they are also in this cluster area, they are also 1 mile away? How are they different than your site?
They're very different. The planning board meeting minutes were very specific as to the existence of 3 concrete and asphalt plants. And they were not speaking to any of the other sites that you just rattled off and prattled on about in your statement.
Excuse me.
So
I
there's,
won't be personal to say rattled on to Christine.
Yes.
so there's very different because none of those sites were referenced, or the master plan meeting minutes were very clear about adding additional, more than the existing. So I think you'd be in a very difficult position to start to sort of drag other sites in beyond those facilities that were contemplated when the master plan, or when the planning board had the hearing on the reexamination report. So no, from a planning point of view, I think that it's a very different case for those other properties.
And you mentioned at the beginning, size, both the anchor site and the harm site are larger than yours. Yours, same opinion.
Again, I think the board can look at the totality of the evidence that I presented for particular suitability. I think the board can look at the master plan findings where it was acknowledged that 3 exist, and the sites that you're presenting just don't have the same set of facts and circumstances. If I were representing one of those other sites, I couldn't say to the board, yes, but here the planning board was making a finding that no additional sites because one doesn't exist there. So I just don't think that there's a direct parallel to those properties given the facts of our subject property, the size, shape together with the improvements we're on, and the actions and the findings of the planning board.
What specific facts beyond the quote you read from the hearing differentiate this site from those 2 sites?
Well, this is an irregularly shaped piece of property that has a concrete plant on it. So, I mean, it's in the SED zone, so it's going to have some similarities, it's going to have some differences. Those sites are also in the SED zone, but they don't have all of the same characteristics as far as the improvements and the utilization of the subject property and how this property was considered in the master plan.
If I might, at least for identification purposes only, have a map of the area marked. I'll show it to Mr. Butler first.
Okay.
04 for identification. We have our
Yes.
gentleman will come around.
Mr. Posh is going to come down and meet you there.
showing you, Ms. Capone, what's marked as 04, and identifying in yellow the subject premises as subject property, the property right across the rail line as the anchor property, irregularly shaped as you can see, and the Harms property. Can you recognize or identify?
Mr. Doyle, can you get to the mic, please? Sorry.
By next meeting, I promise. Can you recognize or identify any, obviously there's difference in sizes. If you had a meets and bounds description, they'd all be different. But aren't they all sort of cut out of the same cloth in that they all have frontage on Yellowbrook Road? They are all over 30 acres. They all have had industrial uses on them for years. They're all a mile away from Yellowbrook. They're all right there in the zone. What's different about those two from yours?
Well, the main difference is that they are not one of the 3 plans that were identified in the master plan minute, or the planning board minutes. I mean, yeah, they're in the same zone, they're on the same property. That could be said for any property that you're asking for a use variance on. There's always going to be properties that are contiguous that are also on the same zone. That doesn't mean that you can't argue particular suitability on your property. The particular suitability doesn't say that the site has to be uniquely suited and can be the only one suited. So that's not the test. Price Himeji doesn't ask you to go rule out other sites in the area. In fact, you don't have to do that. There's not an exercise that requires you to go up and down the corridor that your property sits in and knock out other properties. That's just not the use variance test. There has to be something particularly suitable, not uniquely suitable, but particularly suitable for your piece of property. And the testimony is in the record, and I think the testimony is sufficient to address the burden of proof that the statute requires for particular suitability. It does not require you to go up and down the zone in the corridor, pointing out what's the same or different of other properties in the zone or other zones around it.
Switching back to the purposes of zoning that would be advanced by granting this variance, you mentioned purpose H concerning transportation routes, promoting free flow of traffic. The board's planner, Ms. Beam, said, quote, "That's a bit of a stretch," end quote. Do you agree or disagree with her?
I can understand how she would come to that conclusion, but I still think it's inappropriate. I think it's inappropriate given the fact that Gary Dean testified that a conforming use in the zone would have far more of an impact on the traffic patterns. So, but if the board, you only have to demonstrate one purpose of the land use law being advanced. So my direct testimony cited G, M, and H. So even if the board were to agree with your planner that were not so applicable, and again, I think it is. I think the board can consider it, given the testimony of Mr. Dean. But I would say if it would probably be less applicable than the other two, but I still think the board can consider it.
You mentioned Mr. Dean's report. You're familiar with it?
I'm familiar with the finding or the conclusions.
And his conclusion was there's other permitted uses that could create much more traffic, correct?
Yes, I think he submitted, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 scenarios that he submitted, but he submitted at least 2 other scenarios, and I want to say it was 3.
There's 3.
Yeah.
You have a sense of this area, an outstanding sense of this area. And by area, I mean Monmouth, Ocean County, having worked as long as you did for as many commercial people as you have. Do you see any of those scenarios that Mr. Dean made up as a possibility, as being realistic, that a 575,000 square foot office building would be on this site?
The point of Mr. Dean's exercise was not to demonstrate the market viability. Mr. Dean is not a market expert. He is a traffic engineering expert, and his point of his exercise was to demonstrate that the permissible floor area under a permitted use, zoned as of right and legislatively determined appropriate by the governing body for this area, would have more of a traffic impact. There was nothing about Mr. Dean's testimony or his report that spoke to the market viability of any of those three scenarios that he proposed for this board.
Can you really judge what could be put on a site without an engineer fine-lining it, at least to a conceptual stage, and showing circulation paths, parking spaces, landscaping, buffering, none of which Mr. Dean
I'm going to
did?
object to this question. Ms. Cofone is a planner, not an engineer, and this is regarding testimony and a hypothetical, or, sorry, not a hypothetical, but exhibits that were placed into the record by Mr. Dean. Ms. Cofone already has said why Mr. Dean put those into the records and what the purpose of those were. So the relevancy of whether the site should have been, or the concept should have been drawn by an engineer is not pertinent to this board's.
I think, Mr. Chairman, if I may, unless you want to rule in my favor already,
Well, no, sir, I think that was as a request from the board also to Mr. Dean to clarify, because he had stated certain issues, in his testimony, if I recall it properly.
right.
He was telling us in testimony what could go there. Well, as direction from the board, we wanted to see that, and that's why Mr. Dean drew up, he did what he was asked from the board to do.
And those exhibits that were drawn by Mr. Dean were accepted by the board and by the board's professionals.
Correct.
The fact that they're in evidence doesn't mean that they can't be talked about. It makes it easier to talk about it. And at this point, being cross-examination, I certainly should have the right to. I began my examination.
I understand, sir, but I don't think this is a witness that you should be cross-examining on Mr. Dean's.
She testified that she relied upon the conclusions of the experts on her team. She just said, Mr. Dean said that there would be far less traffic than could be in the proposed use, excuse me, not proposed, the possible uses, far more than the proposed use would have. I think it's right, and I should be able to challenge that comparison, both whether the number of traffic that Mr. Dean sees by just putting a block on a piece of paper, as well as the
With all-
propriety
With all due respect, John,
of her use of Mr. Dean's number for the proposed use.
And I'm not going to opine one way or the other on the appropriateness of what was submitted, but there were concept sketches provided, including parking and relevant areas for drainage, that had a KCE title block, which is Mr. Kennedy's engineering firm, on it. There was testimony provided at a meeting by Mr. Dean, who was cross-examined by your predecessor regarding the adequacy of that information, and we asked questions as well. So while I don't disagree that there was reliance upon that, and there was testimony by Ms. Cofone that there was reliance upon those concept sketches, we did vet out the appropriateness of them at the appropriate time. So, those witnesses were cross-examined and were released. So at this point, I don't know how you want to move forward, Mr. Chair.
I think we need to move forward. I don't think Ms. Capone, I think what her answer was is, yes, it was in her report, and yes, she did do the block on it, but going,
Not the block.
She did not do anything with that.
no, she testified that she used that report, or the hypothetical that it could be. She testified to that, and I think she just stated she did testify to that. But as far as challenging her on that, I don't know if she's the witness that you should be challenging. And, Mr. Gazarovski had challenged Mr. Dean on that in prior, cross-examination. And so I don't see how we can challenge her. She based it on the testimony that Mr. Dean gave. So that's where I really want to leave that one.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
In tonight's testimony, and I'll ask another question about the Dean report, but I'll
Okay.
phrase it based upon her testimony
Okay,
tonight.
thank you.
Tonight,
Keep it to her testimony.
Tonight, you testified that your conclusions were drawn in part upon the expert testimony. Tonight, you testified that you found nothing in their reports that you objected to. And most recently, you said that one of the reasons why this use was appropriate is that this use's creation of traffic would be far less than the possible put forth by Mr. Dean with these sketches. Mr. Dean also said, with respect to your reliance upon the 60 trucks for the present use, the end user will dictate, and I'm reading from page 7 of his report, the end user demand will dictate the level of regular traffic activity associated with the operation. However, as the applicant is the principal end user of the product with fairly low projections, a better determination of additional traffic can be developed based upon the equipment processing capability. With that quote in mind, does the additional traffic that can be developed based upon the equipment processing capability equal the 60 trucks you found to be?
Sorry.
You found to be the appropriate number to compare.
Once again, I'm going to raise the same objection that I did to the prior question. That was a very long question with a very long statement in it, but has nothing to do with Ms. Caffone's testimony. Once again, that's the proper cross-examination of Gary Dean, which completed at the last hearing. And Mr. Gazarovski did cross Mr. Dean, the public crossed Mr. Dean. It's not appropriate to ask Ms. Caffone this question.
I agree. I think she based her testimony, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Capone, she based her testimony on testimony provided.
But
Am I correct?
No, absolutely.
But for the board to rely upon that testimony, if it is, as this testimony is clearly wrong, the testimony that there would be 60 trucks, when Mr. Dean says it should be based upon the capability of of how much product could be raised. When we're aware that...
I'm going to object right now before more statements go into the record that are untrue.
Correct. As far as the testimony, I don't recall, I would have to go back to Mr. Dean's testimony on that. I have Ms. Capone's testimony here, and if we can kind of keep it to what her testimony was, as far as a planner, that's the direction I want to stay. We can't cross-examine Mr. Dean at this point.
Understood.
And, Mr. Chairman, it's Caffone.
Ms. Capone,
F, with an F.
With an F.
With an F, sorry.
sorry,
That's okay. Right, no,
I'm sorry.
no worries, it's fine.
You mentioned that the applicant is required to respond to the Medici case and reconcile the use with the use that is been prohibited. Let me just take you through, as I understand the facts of that prohibition ordinance now in effect and the Medici case. Am I right in saying that asphalt manufacturing has been prohibited in Howell since 1963?
No,
Why is that not a true statement?
well, because if they took it out of its permitted use list in 2017, then how could you come to the conclusion that it was prohibited since 1963?
Wasn't that your the bulk of your, or the thrust of your testimony during the interpretation hearing?
Once again, I'm going to object to anything that wasn't testified to or was before this board for this application.
I agree. Let's keep it to this application.
Did not the zoning board determine in 2017 that with Mr. Howard's report sitting here, that the asphalt manufacturing had in fact been prohibited in Howell since 1963?
And I'm going to object to this
I
line
agree.
of questioning. I mean,
That-
we're
that-
here. Sorry.
That's why they are here, is because of that zoning board interpretation. Let's stay to this application.
Is it true that on May 18th, Howell Township adopted a land use element amendment,
What year? May 18th?
2017?
I don't know. I don't know if that was the date it was adopted.
Are you aware of the Howell Township land use element amendment and its provisions with relationship to this zone?
I am aware of it, yes.
That starts off with a single paragraph. The overall character of the township has not changed since the previous amendment to the land use element, or have substantive changes in land use, environmental conditions, or circulation patterns in the township. The last report before 2017 was 2014. Would you agree with that statement as it relates to this SED district?
The character of this SED district has not changed.
Between 2014 and 2017?
In 2017, that's probably a fairly accurate statement.
Has it changed from 2017 until December 17th, 2018?
Probably not substantially.
And that land use element amendment also said on page 7, paragraph 14, manufacturing should be removed as a permitted use in the SED zone, correct?
It did, yes.
Is there anything that is lacking in clarity about the intent, purpose, or meaning of that single declarative sentence to you?
Well, you're reading from the actual document. I don't know what type of discussion there was at the minutes, so.
Mr. Dahl, may I ask a question real quick? Since you said that, you stated manufacturing. Was that just, quote, manufacturing, or was that manufacturing of asphalt or concrete products?
That's the process I'm trying to go through historically, because as I understand the burden on the applicant, you've got to reconcile the existing ordinance with the fact that you want to do something differently. So the sentence I read is exactly what I read.
Okay.
That is,
Manufacturing.
manufacturing should be removed as a permitted
Okay.
use in the SED zone.
That's why I was questioning.
On the same date, the master plan reexamination based on that land use element was adopted, and did it not say on page 3, the planning board should update its goals and objectives to reflect the priorities of the planning board and the preparation of new element and amendments to its master plan?
I don't have that document in front of me, so I can't answer that. What is the date, though, on the document that you're reading from?
May 2017.
What's this? What page were you reading from?
3, paragraph numbered 1.
The planning board should update its goals and objectives to reflect the priorities of the planning board and the preparation of new element and amendment to the master plan? That?
Yes. Okay.
Right?
Seeing you have the document in front of you,
I do.
I would ask you to turn to page 14 and please read paragraph 14.
paragraph am I reading?
14.
No. Manufacturing should be removed as a permitted use in the SED zone. Yes, I read that.
Oh,
However.
thank you. No, there's no question
I don't
pending.
think I get to answer the question.
There's no question pending, Mr. Chairman. I realize
I
he
agree.
wants to give a statement, but there's no question pending.
You did ask her to read it.
Right.
So
I did.
what was the purpose of that, Mr. Doyle?
She had the document in front of her, and I'm trying to elicit from her the history by which the ordinance they're seeking relief from was adopted, so we could determine whether, as she's testified, it's reconcilable, an ordinance that said there shall be no manufacturing of concrete or asphalt on this site in this zone, with the fact that they want to do it
That's
Sir,
not,
they-
less than
that's
a
not
year
Ex-
later.
not what it says.
Except that the meeting minutes that preceded that adoption were very clear that there are different types of SED zones, different types of manufacturing, and that even further, the town should do further study to see what type of manufacturing should go everywhere. So I understand that you would like to read those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 words that are in 14, but to read those and divorce them from the meeting minutes that went and led up to that, to me, is improper and disingenuous.
Well,
Because the board clearly wants to treat manufacturing in your SED zones differently.
Ms.
Yeah,
Capone,
I
Ms.
thought-
hang on, Mr. Doyle. I'm going to rule in this because you asked her to read something.
Right.
That's not her testimony. She read something that you asked her to read. Now, if there's a follow-up to it, I've got to allow her to put a follow-up to that, because that's not her testimony. She's reading from an ordinance, period.
From a master plan.
Examination report, not an ordinance.
What-
No, the ordinance,
her to read came out of a master plan.
that's the master plan, not the ordinance? Okay, so,
I didn't get to the ordinance yet.
okay.
That's part of the history.
But as far as reading something, that's technically not her testimony on the
I
record.
understand.
Okay.
What were the master plan hearing minutes that you just read previously placed in the record?
They're part of the record. Please
Were they placed in the record on this application?
I believe that they were submitted to the board by Mr. Gazarovski.
Yes. And as far as placing on the record, I think she's done a very good job of putting it on the record tonight.
Whether the question was asked or not, she did.
We're not put into the record, Mr. Chair.
They were not read into the record.
No, Mr. Gazarovski, as you could recall.
No,
Referenced the transcripts multiple times, yet did not provide us with anything. So
No,
there is no transcript of those minutes put into the record of this proceeding.
except Jennifer, I have to object to you on that. Tonight, she has put it is in
No, I
the record
agree,
tonight.
but the transcript.
Prior to? No.
Correct.
Prior
That was
to, no.
not put into the record prior to this cross-examination.
But it is in the record now.
Correct.
Well,
Okay.
And if, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was checking something, because
I'm getting
I
used
was
to it.
under the impression that Mr. Gazarovski had submitted those transcripts to the board.
I think that may be under the interpretation. I don't think it was.
No, it was recently.
No, he had indicated multiple times during the course of multiple proceedings that he would provide us with a transcript, but
We
that
never received
never
it.
happened.
These are the first transcripts we've
Correct.
received, and they came from Mr. Doyle.
As you asked of me before, let me ask of you, Ms. Cofone. You just read something to elucidate on the reading of the sentence I asked you. What was the document you read from, giving the name, date, nature of it?
It was the transcript of public hearing dated May 18th, 2017, from the Planning Board of the Township of Howell, discussing proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance.
And is there a page number to those minutes?
Of course. Let's see, the discussion on the manufacturing starts on page 17.
Do we have that? What's that? Do we have that document? It's right here. Is that the minutes or an actual transcription of the meeting?
It's a transcript, I believe.
And where did you receive it from, or obtain
It's a
it?
transcript. It's a transcript of a public hearing. Mr. Butler provided them to me. So it's not the minutes, it's definitely a transcript.
How long is that document? I see we have it, and it is
31 pages, 32
Okay.
pages? 33 pages.
whatever may have been said in those minutes, and I will read it, and to the degree that it has relevance, would ask for the opportunity to continue my cross-examination of you once I've read it. Nevertheless, on May the 18th, the planning board concluded by unanimously adopting the land use element and the master plan based upon that land use element, both of which documents said that manufacturing should be prohibited in the SED zone. Is that not correct?
It's correct, we need a use variance.
Okay. And by doing that, they suggested in effect that the municipality should adopt the zone, an ordinance change, correct? That's the purpose of passing recommendations like this in the master plan, isn't it?
Yes, is to make modifications to the ordinance.
And did the township make that modification?
Well, they removed, yes, they did. They took out, they only, well, in part, the way the master plan recommended was that manufacturing should be removed as a permitted use in the SED zone. While they removed concrete and asphalt, they certainly left 12 other manufacturing uses in the SED zone.
So, in other words, the planning board wanted a broader exclusion as a permitted use of all manufacturing. The governing body kept 12 manufacturing items, but accepted the planning board's recommendation with respect to only the manufacture of concrete and asphalt.
After reading the transcript, my opinion is that the planning board did
Excuse
not
me,
want.
Excuse me, I didn't
No,
ask you
no,
for your
that-
opinion.
you-
I asked
yes,
you what
you
You
happened.
did,
You
though. But
need
you
to let
asked
her
me if that was what the
answer.
planning board meant.
Let her answer the question, please.
Let her answer the question, please.
So your question, I believe, was, did the planning board want a broader prohibition on all manufacturing uses?
That was
what-
not my question.
Okay, then
Okay, then
rephrase.
what was your question?
What was your question, sir?
Did not the governing body limit the manufacturing that was to be prohibited, maintaining 12 items of manufacturing that the planning board said should be restricted or prohibited, but the governing body chose to keep 2 as prohibited, being only the manufacture of concrete and asphalt?
So that wasn't your question, but that's a different question.
Okay, then
So
answer
if your
that one.
different question is, did the governing body only take out one use where the planning board recommended a more broad removal?
2, but yes.
Only one use was removed from the SED zone
By the council,
by the
correct?
council.
And what was,
And it was not my recollection or my read of the minutes is not that the planning board wanted a wholesale removal of manufacturing. I mean, Ms. Beam is on record in those minutes stating, it depends on where we are in town. Some of them are located on county roads. So in my opinion as a planner and reading those minutes, there was not ever to be an entire prohibition on manufacturing in the SED zone. What there was to be a study of noting that some manufacturing uses are different than others and they have different impacts. And further, that the town didn't want any more concrete plants than those that existed. So I don't agree with you that it was to be a wholesale removal of manufacturing from the SED zone.
the governing body, after first reading, sent, as they have to by law, the proposed ordinance, and before second reading, for the planning board's determination as to whether the ordinance was substantially consistent with the master plan recommendation, correct?
Yes, that's a procedural requirement.
And the planning board did so find that the ordinance to be adopted was in fact substantially compliant with the master plan recommendation.
Yes.
And the ordinance as adopted, without any interpretation or any opinion, said what?
It said a number of things, but it took concrete and asphalt manufacturing out of the permitted use list. We're not a permitted use, we're here for a D1 variance. I've answered that no less than 15 times tonight. We never tried to hide from that. It's not a permitted use in the zone. The governing body took it out, and that's why we're here.
And for the 15 times that you say I've asked the question and you've answered it, which is inaccurate, you've said they took it out of the list of permitted uses. Is that correct?
It is correct, they took it out. It's not a permitted use anymore.
Where did they put it?
What do you mean, where did they put it? They took it out.
Did they not take it into a separate section,
Use
paragraph 5,
Microphone,
that is
microphone.
prohibited?
Yes, it's a prohibited use. So it's not a permitted use, it's a prohibited use in the SED zone.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
this is, over here, sorry, this is now the 5th, 6th, 7th time he's asked the same question. We're here for a D1 variance. It's not permitted in the zone.
Let's move forward.
Are you familiar with any cases wherein the courts have been called upon to determine the reconcilability of a use variance approval for a use that has been recently prohibited by the enactment of the governing body?
Could you re-ask that question? Because
okay.
I don't
Yeah.
understand it myself.
Okay, if I may. This, and I'll change it to try to make it more understandable. This applicant is seeking a use variance, D1, for a use that was determined by the governing body to be a specifically named prohibited use a year ago. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you familiar with any case that has been confronted with that situation?
No, but I didn't do the research to look for them either.
Generally, as to the board's duties, and then more specifically in this situation, is it not true that the established case law says that variances should be granted only sparingly?
I object to the point that she knows legal case law.
I think it's something that she could answer, Mr. Butler, to be honest with you. It's a simple yes or no answer.
Okay.
Thank you. If she knows.
This board exists to grant variances, so, I mean, I'm not sure that I agree with you that variances should only be granted sparingly.
Doesn't this board
Can
exist
she-
to
can she-
consider
Use
variances?
the mic.
She finished her
Oh,
question?
Use
Aaron
mic.
voice tailed off and I couldn't. Go
Okay.
ahead.
No, it's-
Are you finished?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
finished.
You said this board exists to grant variances. Doesn't this board exist to consider variance applications and rule on them within their reasonable discretion in accordance with the facts and the law to either
I'm
approve
going to
or deny
object
them?
to this line of questioning.
If-
Ms. Cofone has answered the procedure this board should be using to grant a use variance, which is the application, which is before the board.
Mr.
And
Trop.
I simply want to state that it's fairly obvious what the answer is, and I think Ms. Cofone can answer it. And I would just ask that she respond yes or no if she knows.
What is the question again?
You
Should variances be
you
granted
said-
sparingly?
You said that this board's job is to grant variances. I asked you, is that correct, or is it that this board's function is to consider variance applications and based upon the facts and the law, determine whether to approve or deny them.
Right, of course, that's their function.
Okay. Is it true that a reviewing court gives less deference to a grant of a variance than a denial of a use variance?
Once again, I'm going to object to the question. Mr. Capone's
think
not
it's-
a legal scholar on the review mechanisms of a court.
And Mr. Chair, just for the record, I think the question is a fair question, but I think limited to a yes or no answer. As a planner, I'm sure Ms. Cofone has knowledge of what the legal process is as to granting of variances here and reviewing of variances. And if, quite frankly, if she can answer the question, I would suggest that she answer it. Thank you.
I'm not aware of any body of law that suggests that the court should give more preference to denials or than to approvals, if I understood your question correctly.
To the degree that I disagree, I will not go further, but I would only suggest that this case bears upon such legal principles and unusual circumstances that the board might ask of counsel, both of us, to submit briefs to your attorney before
No.
they make a determination.
A determination on what?
Gentlemen, it seems like we're doing our summations right now, so I think that anything regarding summations or written briefs, et cetera, it's going to be within the purview of the board, but statements at this point in time regarding legal principles, quite frankly, are inappropriate. So let's just move forward, if we may respectfully, with the cross-examination. Thank you.
Is the board, in your planning expertise, may the board reach a decision on a variance application to grant it merely because they disagree with the ordinance from which relief is sought?
If Ms. Cofone can answer the
If she
question,
can answer
I
it,
don't,
yes.
you know.
I don't know.
Are you familiar with the doctrine in land use principles of usurpation or arrogation by which a Board of Adjustment seeks to take over the governing body's function?
I'm going to stop this whole line of questioning again. I mean, we're getting along the lines of, Ms. Cofone is a planner. She provided planning
right.
testimony. This is all legal argument presented by Mr. Doyle in the form of a question.
I think there's a limit to what Ms. Cafone's legal ability is, and I think asking her to substitute her judgment for that of the board is somewhat inappropriate. So, Mr. Chair, I think the question is inappropriate. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you,
Withdrawn.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you. You are familiar with the Medici case, are you not?
Yes.
The Medici case provided some circumstances which would suggest how to prove the necessary reconciliation, correct?
Correct.
One of them was whether the use was a relatively new use that may not have been foreseen when the master plan was adopted.
Yes,
That's not the case here.
it is not.
A second one they suggested was that there were substantial changes in the character of the neighborhood surrounding the subject property. That basis for reconciliation isn't present here, is it?
It is not.
A third one was that there was a significant extrinsic change, such as a new highway, that may have resulted in changes. That's not present here, is it?
It is not.
In fact, this land hasn't changed in a while. The uses on it haven't changed in a while. Do you think that the governing body knew this land when they chose to reduce the master plan recommendation sent them?
I think my testimony was pretty clear on the Medici proofs and how I intended to reconcile them.
And that testimony was based upon looking into other areas of the master plan that were general in language, correct?
No, that's not correct.
What did you look at for reconciliation?
Well, what I looked at for reconciliation was the character of the area, and I think the meeting minutes speak directly to the reconciliation. The board was, or the planning board was very clear when it said, the question is how many more do we want? So, and which is why when I talked about the Medici reconciliation, my specific words were, I am really challenged to see how this application is rising to the level of a substantial detriment, given the fact that you had an existing concrete plant that was in the count of concrete plants that the planning board referenced when they took it out, and they said their line of thought was, how many more do we want? So that's what I relied on for the Medici. Not a new highway, not concrete being a new use. I didn't testify to any of that. That's Mr. Doyle reading out of the Cox book,
Okay.
and it was not in my direct testimony at all.
When you say that the planning board in their discussion said no more, that's not the language of the ordinance that was ultimately adopted. They said prohibited, and they didn't grandfather the existing uses, did they?
Once again,
Again.
we're back here. This is a D1
One.
variance.
Prohibited use in the zone. I
Right,
have
we're-
asked
we're
and answered
back.
that question. I've lost count. I'm not good with
Mi-
math. I can't count that high.
I'll withdraw the question. Ms. Gaffone, you say that the ordinance can be reconciled because there are planning board minutes that in effect say that there should be no more manufacturing plants than currently exist. Do I have your?
Not in effect say that they directly say that. Not that they
Okay.
in effect say that, they actually directly say it.
And they said that in 2018.
Once again, this has been asked and answered.
17.
Oh, 17. Isn't it true that the concrete plant on this site was not in operation in 2017?
It doesn't matter. It existed, and I've already testified on abandonment and the well-accepted principles of abandonment. It doesn't matter. It could be sitting there for 30 years, and if it wasn't operating, they still have a right to fire it up and use it under the case law.
What was the nature of the plant that was there?
It was
Once
quiet.
again, we're going back into testimony that was already provided, answers that were questions that were already asked and answered.
Was the-
Multiple times. We are here for a D1 use variance.
Was the plant that was there a manufacturing plant?
Once again, it's the same, we're getting into the same question.
That I can't even get out.
Let's get the
No.
question out first.
Let's get the question out first,
you.
and then we'll move forward.
Right, Mr. Doyle.
The plant you recited as being there manufactured concrete, not asphalt, correct?
Isn't there a case that says they're the same thing?
Is that
Yeah,
correct?
there's a case that says concrete and asphalt are the same thing. So, no, that's not correct.
Are you saying that asphalt and
Once
concrete
again,
are the same thing?
that's the problem with allowing the question to
Let's-
be answered, because we go down into.
It wasn't this witness
Right.
that actually answered that question. And it's not in her direct testimony of a planner that was testifying to that, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chairman, let me be clear. There is no more single fundamental question I have asked this evening than, based upon her testimony, the question I want to ask. Why is that? Two reasons. One, at the beginning of this testimony, I purposely asked the questions that made the role of Ms. Gaffone exactly what I know it is, which she does well, and that is to round up all of the evidence in support of a reason well given by her to justify the grant of the variance. That's the single biggest question here, and she's the only person, as she testified, that can really give that. Second reason why this question should be asked and answered. She said that the ordinance that prohibits must be seen through the camera of what happened at the planning board. I'll accept that for the purpose of this question, that the planning board said we have these plants and that many should remain. So I said, believing as I do, that there's a fundamental land use difference between plants that use cement and the binder of water to make concrete than plants that use oil as a binder to make asphalt. They have different properties, they have different consequences, they have different effects, different impacts upon the neighborhood. So when Ms. Cofone says concrete and asphalt are the same thing, I can substitute the asphalt, a new plant, for the old one. It is very important to identify that.
That is not what's before this board. What's before this board is a D1 use variance. Mr. Doyle is muddying the waters by trying to make this something that it's not. This is a D1 use variance because the use is not permitted in the zone. Ms. Cofone presented her testimony to the board with all of her reasons, as Mr. Doyle just said, the reasons, the great reasons that she presented to substantiate why this board can grant that variance. He is going down a hole where he wants to somehow make this what it is not. This is a D1 use variance. He's now asked her questions for almost 3 hours.
Right.
Stick to the testimony on the planning principles that she has provided. That's what the questions should be. Simply on the testimony that she has provided.
She testified that concrete and asphalt are the same thing. She said that it was in effect a one-for-one transfer, so it was consistent with how the ordinance should be viewed based upon the plan. And I think that
When
all know
did
there's
she
differences.
testify to that? Tonight?
Tonight, right now.
Okay.
And what I, hold on a second. And what I believe she may have said is that there's a case out there.
That's what I heard. That's where I was
Yes.
coming
And once
back
again,
to.
Ms. Cofone is not a legal expert. She's
I
an expert
understand.
in planning. So her testimony should be placed on her planning testimony that
I
was provided
agree.
to this
That-
board to substantiate the variances that were requested.
That's what I heard. Do you want to repeat your statement that you made
Yes,
about
I
that?
believe there was a case out of Lopakon, and the findings of the case were that they are the concrete and asphalt, there's really no difference in those two type of plants.
And that's not on your opinion, that's on case law
You
opinion,
know, it's
correct?
my understanding of a case from Lopakon that was found, that
Okay.
concrete and asphalt are similar, or the same.
Okay, except,
You know, I can't ask her about case law, but she can cite case
okay.
law. If you can place your hands on this case, please supply it to me through Mr. Butler and Mr. Tropoli, too.
I think we already have it.
We have it.
It's already in the record.
Can I have the site?
I'm not sure whether it's in this record.
I think it was put in.
It may have been. Regardless,
We'll get it.
Interpretation part.
I think it was done during the interpretation.
Okay, so, Mr. Butler,
regardless,
if you don't mind,
I
could
can
you
provide, not an
provide
issue.
those again?
Not an issue.
I know there was testimony on it, so,
Not an issue. I can provide that to Mr. Doyle.
okay,
Give me a minute, please, Mr. Chairman.
okay. Can we stay a little bit longer?
Time on this, and we have to talk about the resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I might help you with the dialogue, and I don't know what it is, but I know that Mr. Tropoli had mentioned to me before, he hoped that I would cut myself off, or limit myself, rather, in a way so that, and I know it's 10:30, your usual quitting time, But while I might have had more questions, I, in favor of the board getting to hear from the public, let me take a seat and let them ask if you're going to stay.
Just so I'm clear, Mr. Doyle, you're not finished cross-examining, is that correct?
The thing that, no, I am not, and especially because the critical thing she cited for, no, I'm not, because I need to read that 31-page transcript to be able to look at it and evaluate whether there's any further questions.
You know, Mr. Chair, while I respect what Mr. Doyle's trying to do, I mean, for the purposes of the record, I don't know if we should, I mean, there may be more questions, again, based on additional testimony. So I think if that's the case, and it's 10:30, we should probably also, you know, consider closing this at this point, giving it a new date, and moving on to our other bit of business, which we have, which is our adoption of the yearly resolution, which we really should spend at least a few minutes talking about.
Yes.
So,
I
that's...
apologize, but I don't know that was referred to in the transcript, and if it was, I didn't pick it up, and if it wasn't, then I certainly need to see it. Thank you.
Can I ask, Mr. Doyle, how much more time do you think you need to question Ms. Cofone?
It's not a matter of time. I might need no time, but she's made a large point of this 31-page transcript that I did not see referred to in, and I read her transcript, her testimony clearly. So in order to question her, I have to read it. I got something new.
No, I understand.
That's fine, that's fine.
So-
And I would, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
Mr. Trump.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I don't think that, my suggestion would be not to have the public ask questions until Ms. Cofone is finished being cross-examined.
That would be my opinion.
I agree.
As much as I'd like to respect the public, if they have questions, there may be other questions, and, you know, I would suggest that we do it in one fell swoop, as they say.
I agree.
Mr. Chair, it's up to you, but that would be my recommendation.
What's our date that we have available? That's one of the extra dates.
February 4th.
Okay, also, Mr. Butler, can you
Yes.
provide that case law before then also?
Yes, I will provide that to Mr. Doyle. That's not an issue. I'm trying to find out, hold on.
I have another case in Rumson that night.
We're not going to the Super Bowl.
I thought the ref might get you.
You have another case?
I'll send Justin.
Okay. Can we say yes? Can we say yes? All right, she is available on the 4th.
And can we have an
And-
extension of time on the record?
Yes, and also, if possible, I don't know if this is possible, if we could maybe potentially have a special hearing earlier than the February 4th date, maybe late January.
Unfortunately, there's no Mondays available, and that's the only time our professionals are available because we have holidays in there. Our reorg isn't even until January 14th,
Oh,
so,
your reorg is that late? Okay.
so. But do you want to provide a date for the extension of time?
We'll do the end of February, is fine.
End of February?
We'll do end of March.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Case number BA 1806, L&L Paving, will be adjourned to February 4th, 7:30, with no further notice. Also, Mr. Doyle, are you going to be prepared on that date to start your direct testimony?
I would intend to be.
Okay.
I understand that we would, at the beginning of that meeting, have my questioning of Ms. Cofone if I want to ask any
Yeah.
based on the transcript as well
Correct.
as that last colloquy and the public. And yes, assuming we finish before the end of the night, I'll call my first witness.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. So we'll do Christine on the transcript, and then public of Christine, and then Mr. Doyle can present his
Correct.
first.
Move forward.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a voucher here in front of me. let's do the voucher real quick, so you can get paid. Okay, Mr. Tropoli's voucher. Do I have a motion to approve vouchers?
I make the motion to approve the voucher, Mr. Tropoli.
Motion by Mr. Moretti,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Roscoe. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Voucher approved.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Tropoli.
Mr. Chair, I'll be brief, given the time of this evening that we spent on this one application. We're still
still
in
have a
session,
meeting
folks. Thank you. So for the members of the board that are new, and I think there may be one or two, this is the resolution constituting yearly review and report for 2018. We are charged as a zoning board to present a report on a yearly basis to the mayor and council for further review. That includes not only a listing of the cases that we have ruled upon, or you have ruled upon as a body, but also a resolution which covers what the professionals and the board members that are part of the Rules Committee deem to be things that need to be changed, modified, and so forth. So the resolution that I believe all of you have, and hopefully have all looked at, is a combination of a number of people's impressions and observations of things that could be modified that is important to bring to the council's opinion, to the town council's attention. So what you have here has been looked at by the fellow members of the board, of the Rules Committee, and I feel, as an attorney, that it's a very appropriate document. Some of the items have been carried forward from year to year because the town has not acted upon it. But what we've noticed as a group recently, and I think Matt brought this out, is that a number of matters have been adopted. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So that they actually do listen to us. Now, Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether or not recently if the town council has permitted yourself
I haven't in I think the last time
to
was...
do that, but I don't know, that might have even been in the Van Noy years.
That was the Vanoy years.
Yeah. It's been a while,
Yeah.
but it's an important document. I do think it gets a lot of review, and clearly it's been getting a lot of action recently, so,
Well, I will contribute a lot of that to Matt being here at the zoning board.
no question.
A lot of that, because he's got his finger on the pulse. That's something that we were requesting for many years.
Right.
Prior to that, to have somebody come in.
Right.
But, yes,
So, once again, there are matters that have been carried over from year to year, but there are many that have been removed because the council has acted favorably and has listened to the board. So with that in mind, Mr. Chair, I'm going to offer the resolution up. It was circulated for comments. Matt had a few, but other than that, I didn't receive any. So this, I believe, is the final draft.
I was fine with it. It was everything we discussed.
Okay, so, this is basically the last piece of business for the calendar year 2018 for the board's consideration. So I'll submit it to the board for your review and for your action at this time. Thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve the review letter?
I'll make a motion to approve it.
I'll second it.
Motion by Mr. Amata, seconded by Mr. Moretti. Can we have a roll call on that?
Mr. Armato?
Yes.
Mr. Mertens?
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. St. Clemente?
Yes.
Mr. Orozco?
Yes.
Chairman Nansen?
Yes.
Motion carries.
And I want to also thank all of our professionals. I want to thank the board members. A lot of us, I hoping a lot of everybody's back, but, I wanted to thank y'all for a wonderful year.
It's been fun.
Excellent job. We've moved a lot of cases this year. And then also the professionals. Y'all deserve a big round of applause. I mean, literally. Y'all have done a stellar job this year. I mean, and it hasn't been an easy one either. And I thank y'all for that. you want to see professionalism at its best, you can look right over there at that whole bench, starting right there.
Thank you.
Number one, all the way down. Hey, I really want to thank y'all. And, won't see anybody till after the New Year's. And get your applications in, please. And board members, it's your last board member this year, get your applications in. I know you're kind of sitting on the fence, but, the question you asked earlier, that's why
I
we have
actually was gonna
alternates.
send the links today, but they
Well-
weren't working, so I
That's
gotta
why
redo
we
them
have
tomorrow.
alternates.
It'd be more than just a few meetings.
That's fine. That's fine. That's why we have alternates. And I tell you, we've got a group of pretty good alternates. They ask questions. This is their first year, and I think they've participated a lot more than a lot of the alternates that come on. So, I have to commend y'all on that. I appreciate that.
I'm still dumb. I don't know what I'm doing.
Hey, I am too.
It's a learning
I am
process.
too. But, no, y'all did a great job this year. And
Thank you.
It's been a hectic year this year, but it
learned-
doesn't look like it's lightening up any either, so.
I learned quite a bit, to tell you the truth. I didn't realize there was so much involved in this. First of all, I didn't know there was 2 meetings a month. I didn't know that at all. I was expecting 1 month, because I was doing the Board of Ed for 3 years.
Yeah.
and-
Now we're doing.
But, yeah, there's a lot to learn here. I tell you, you really have to be on your toes, and I listened to you, and I'm just amazed by the wealth of knowledge you have.
I've been here a long time,
Yeah.
so, and I'm still learning things.
You guys refer back to cases that
Right
happened
there.
10, 15 years ago. I said, how could you do that? That's amazing.
Well, it's, my background though,
Yeah.
from my whole life, my background is a lot of this. So, it helps, but, like I say, I depend on those guys
Oh,
right
yeah,
there.
definitely, definitely.
I
Jen-
called them,
Jen, she's
I called
a
them,
bulldog, man. Don't want to mess with her.
I called them in preparations for the meetings,
Yeah.
I asked them my questions before we get here. And they're always been available, always. And I thank you guys. Matt, it's been a wonderful year, and I'm still so thankful having land use here. It just makes our life a lot easier.
Now, John, you got to come back yet, right? Yeah. I thought you retired.
What would we do if he wasn't
As
here?
long as
No, we
L&L
would
goes, you're never going to retire, right?
Yeah. But anyway, okay,
How many years did we ask the town to supply it somebody
Oh, my
from the township?
what's that? Oh, yeah, we requested for years.
So we had Chris Jackson on and off, but since.
Right, Matt, it's been great.
It makes a big difference. 'cause then
Oh,
you
it
see what
does.
goes on when they come in.
Well, and has the history on a lot of the residential applications.
Exactly.
Very helpful.
And then not only that, we know where the viewpoint is coming from land use.
Correct.
That's the whole thing.
Face it.
And
You're a rock star.
half
Yep.
the cases we got this year because of the code enforcement.
Okay, guys. Yes, sir.
Friday, the 21st, is the Christmas party in the swim club. Everybody, please go.
Yep.
Okay? We're going to have fun, dance, eat, and chat.
Are you going to dance, Jose? You going to dance?
Of course he is.
Okay.
He's gonna follow Juan. You got a tough.
Yeah, you got a tough dance to follow. Okay, any more business of the board? Seeing none, can Mr.
I'll make a
Amato
motion
make a motion?
to close.
Motion by Mr. Amato, seconded by Mr. Posh. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Zoning Board Adjustment adjourns at 10:40 PM.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Right.
Have a good holiday, everybody.